Derrida says the problem here in this article in these terms, okay? I'm gonna make a statement, then try read a quotation and try to explain it to you, okay? So, in this difference with an A, okay? What's at stake? Time and space. Difference as temporization and difference as spacing, okay? The usual ordinary, Derrida chooses or makes this modification, and it has been much topic of much debate actually in its own time. Okay, simply refer to that older meaning of the Latin term differer rather than the contemporary meaning, meaning of the contemporary English or French term difference, which only indicates that difference in sense of the interval, not identical, okay? So Derrida, with introducing that A, actually is making an attempt to unite, bring together these two aspects of the processes, so to speak, of becoming, okay? Actually, he starts that quotation by asking, how are they to be joined, okay? Difference as temporization and difference as spacing, okay? The quotation now. Let's start, since we are already there, from the problematic of the sign. So you are quite familiar. I'm not talking about some mystic idea here, okay? Problematic of the sign, it has been put forward in structuralism, okay? Problematic of the sign and of writing. The sign is usually said to be put in the place of the thing itself. This is the usual theory of representation. You know, and the real horse is not here, but making, by using the word horse, I make you incite the presence, incite in your thinking, the presence of that horse, okay? You start to imagine that horse somewhere else here, but not there, but not here, okay? The sign is usually said to be put in the place of the thing in itself, the present thing. The horse is there, we know that, okay? For instance, when I say the horse in the stable of Ankara Jockey Kulüp, okay? We know that the horse is there. And here my word, that horse in the Ankara Jockey Kulüp, brings it here to our understanding, to our cognition in its absence. Okay, so in that sense we are talking about a delay, a detour, but what Derrida would mean by temporization would exceed this and spacing. Okay, we will see. Thing here standing equally for meaning or reference. Okay, that horse in the Ankara Jockey Kulüp. Okay. The sign represents the present in its absence. It's not here, but bringing it to your attention here in this class, okay? When we cannot grasp or show the thing, state the present, the being present, then the present cannot be presented. When the present cannot be presented, we signify, okay? We go through the detour of the sign, okay? We take or give signs, we signal. Okay. The sign, in this sense, is deferred presence. Okay. Relate, it's not here. If we really wish, we can go there and bring that horse in this classroom. Okay. But we don't do that. We simply defer its presence in the class. Okay. Whether we are concerned with the verbal or the written sign, with the monetary sign, or with electoral delegation and political representation, the circulation of sign differs the moment in which we can encounter the thing itself, make it ours, consume or expand it, touch it, see it, intuit its presence. What I am describing here, in order to define it as the classically determined structure of the sign in all the banality of its characteristics. Signification as the difference of temporization. And this structure presupposes that the sign, which differs presence, is conceivable only on the basis of the presence that it differs and moving toward the deferred presence that it aims to reappropriate. Okay, so without that supposition, there is no such possibility. Okay, when we are saying words, actually, we are bringing the things in the form of representations which are not present here, absent here. Okay. So, according to this classical semiology, the substitution of the sign for the thing itself is both secondary and provisional. So our aim actually here is not to say this or that word, but to represent, to bring here that horse in Ankara Jockey Kulüp in its absence. Okay, the referent is the essential primary thing. The words I am using here are secondary in relation to it. That's what he is saying. Okay. Secondary due to an original and lost presence from which the sign thus derives. Okay. Provisional as concerns this final and missing presence towards which the sign in this sense is a movement of mediation. Okay, so Derrida would say that out of such an approach there emerge two possibilities. Okay. The first one is the classical one, try to eliminate this deference, okay, in language, caused by language. For instance, when we try to attempt, as the analytic philosophers do, to establish a meta-language, okay, a meta-language which would be able to overcome the idiosyncrasies of ordinary everyday language, in other words, all those glidings or slidings of meanings of the terms, etc., and a language capable of fixing the meanings of the words, etc., okay, what we hope to do is to arrive at clear language, distinct language of a science, okay, a language which is capable of fully expressing what it stands for. In such a situation, however, there remains no place for any idea of difference. Okay, the difference was primarily among the words, okay, the signs themselves. So in this first alternative, one would necessarily arrive at an elimination of the notion of difference. The second alternative so far proposed in Western thinking, Derrida points out in this article, was the Heideggerian notion of that ontological difference. Okay? However, that ontological difference is a difference between ontic and ontological. What's ontic and ontological? The fallenness and the authentic being of Dasein. The primary concern of which is nothing else than that lack or that forgetfulness, or if you like, as Heidegger puts it, the oblivion of being. Okay, you forget the oblivion of being. Oh, sorry, you forget the question of being. You fall into an oblivion. Actually, such an approach, another good example of such an approach, is the Lacanian theory of lack. Okay. A desire described in terms of lack. Lack is always there, can never be filled. So all human actions, from the very start until to the end, revolves around the efforts to fulfill that lack, okay, to make oneself complete again. There is the missing part. Okay. However, Derrida would aim another notion of, another approach to the question of difference. And to be able to do this, he would take a look at, return back to Saussure himself. Okay. As I said, he simply would push forward that arguments developed by de Saussure himself. Okay. Let me read again a few sentences. Okay. Now Saussure, first of all, is the thinker who put the arbitrary character of the sign and the differential character of the sign at the very foundation of general semiology, particularly linguistics. And as we know, these two motives, the arbitrary character of the sign and the differential character of the sign. You know, arbitrary character of the sign refers to the relationship between signifier and signified. Now, this itself was a very powerful design, and it's in itself quite revolutionary. Okay. We will see, especially when Derrida pushes their meanings to their extreme. Okay. The arbitrary character and the differential character of the sign refers to the question of the value of the sign. You know. Now, what Derrida would criticize here, actually, is that neglected aspect, okay, of signification. You know, this was the value of the sign. And signification, however, is that very problem that connects this problem of value of the sign with that earlier problem of the arbitrary character of the sign, or the relationship between the signifier and the signified. Okay. Now, as we have seen, in Lacan, for instance, such a relationship would prove to be impossible, so signification cannot operate. Rather, for instance, he prefers to use another term, signifiance, okay, which refers to the, you know, signifiers, signifieds. Now, what Lacan does, as you remember, is to emphasize this line, the bar, the barrier, okay, between the signifier and the signified, and saying that signification turns out to be impossible. Well, rather, what takes place is the signifiance which is nothing else than the referring of a sign to the other signs, therefore causing a proliferation of signs and meanings, okay, which can never be fixated, however, can never be determined, okay. So it's at this question now Derrida would gradually delve in, okay. And he continues, as we know, these two motives, arbitrary and differential, are inseparable in his view, in Saussure's view, okay. There can be arbitrariness only because the system of signs is constituted solely by the differences in terms, okay, and not by their plenitudes. The elements of signification function due to the compact force of their nuclei, but rather due not to the, compact force of their nuclei, but rather to the network of oppositions that distinguish them, and then relates them one to another. Okay. Arbitrary and differential, says Saussure, are two correlative characteristics. Okay, so these two are closely connected problems. Now, this principle of difference as the condition for signification affects the totality of the sign, as you can imagine. That is, the sign is both signified and signifier. The signified is the concept, the ideal meaning, and the signifier is what Saussure calls the image, or the psychical imprint of a material, physical, for example, acoustical phenomenon. We do not have to go into all problems posed by these definitions here. Let's cite Saussure only at the point which interests us. This point will turn out to be very important. The conceptual side of value is made up solely by relations and differences with respect to the other terms of language, and the same can be said of its material sides. Okay? So, is there anybody who would say anything about the importance of that statement? Its implications, for instance, in terms of the question of that very assumption that we take the world as given. If you really follow this statement, you will find out that nothing can be taken as given. Okay? That's the importance of the statement. Nothing can be taken as given, but everything that appears is nothing else the result of its relationship with other things. Okay? Nothing can be thought in itself, in other words. Even consciousness, for instance, can be thought in itself, it means. Okay? Everything that has been said up to this point boils down to this. In language, he uses that famous statement, there are only differences. Even more important, in structuralism, this argument has been limited to language. In language, there are only differences. Even more important, a difference generally implies positive terms between which the difference is set up, but in language, there are only differences without positive terms. Okay? That's why they were discussing the status of that one single letter A over there. Okay? Whether we take the signified or the signifier, language has neither ideas nor sounds that existed before the linguistic system. This is the meaning of archae writing, actually. That linguistic system, that archae writing, enables the formation of the ideas or sounds as well. Okay? But only conceptual and phonetic differences that have issued from the system. The idea or phonic substance that a sign contains is of less importance than the other signs that surround it. Okay? Actually, this very simple argument has a power to threaten, to shatter down the arguments of structuralism itself, the very analysis of the sign itself. Okay? The sign as such does not mean anything at all, and neither in terms of its conceptual referent nor in terms of its physical presence in the form of a sound or in the form of a grammatical representation here on the board. Okay? It means in itself nothing. Okay? He draws from this two consequences. The first consequence to be from this is that the signified concept is never present in and of itself. The signified concept, when I say horse, what you understand as horse is never present in and of itself. Okay? In a sufficient presence that would refer only to itself, essentially unlawfully. Every concept is inscribed in a chain or in a system within which it refers to the other, to other concepts by means of the systematic play of differences. Okay? This is actually, this systematic play of differences we would call as archae writing. Okay? Such a play, difference, okay, is thus no longer simply a concept, but rather the possibility of conceptuality or a conceptual process and system in general. Okay? The second consequence. The difference of which Saussure speaks is itself, therefore, neither a concept nor a world among others. Okay? The same can be said of fortiori of difference. What's at stake is the differences playing among themselves. Okay? Differences and their play is that which produce the meanings. You know, when we started the discussions with structuralism, we had three terms, and that was the basic problematic. Now we are pushing those arguments, those very same arguments, to their extremes. You know, in the sign, we have distinguished two aspects: signifier, signified. So, when we take language as a representation, what we are suggesting is the pre-given, prior to the system of science, prior to language, pre-given presence of certain horse, for instance, okay, which is usually called within this theoretical framework as the reference. Now, this signifier is the voice or gramma, phoneme or gramma. The physical aspect of the sign, as you know, this was the conceptual, or if you like, the concept of horse that I have. Oh, actually, I can say the concept of that horse in my thinking, and referent that horse in Ankara Jockey Kulüp. Okay. Now, what's at stake is challenging this relationship, okay? What's at stake? We usually, when we sociologists, for instance, go to the field, we usually make this assumption, okay? This part is what our respondent tells us, okay? And much of the research problems, methodical problems, I mean, related to solve this problem. Okay? For instance, whether we formulated our questions in a language good enough to express themselves in the ears of our listeners, okay? So we are middle class men, you know, usually scientists. So we are, as sociologists, go out there and establish contacts with different, very different sections of society. Each different section, for say, using different language, okay? So that when I say law, for instance, when I'm interviewing Soma workers, it would not be understood in the same way when I'm talking with a lawyer in Ankara, okay? So, to be able to solve this problem, I have to adapt my language to render it understandable for the ears of that Soma worker, okay? Or that domestic worker, or whatever, okay? For the higher sections, I should use another language. For lower sections, different languages, etc., etc. Okay? Many problems of communication I'm referring to here. Okay, so formulating a question in that or this way makes a lot difference. A good example in case was the questions concerning monthly income. Okay. You go to a peasant woman and ask her about her monthly income, for instance. This is one of the problems sociologists experience quite often in the field, okay? For instance, in the studies recently conducted in connection with that regional projects in the eastern part of Anatolia, okay, sociologists, anthropologists have been employed according to the requirements of new international arrangements. Okay, so you go and ask questions. Okay, what's your income, man? Okay, there's no answer. Even the term is not understood. Monthly income, what do you say? Okay, these people have no connection with the concept or no concept of the relationship between a time period, month, and income. Okay, so they do not have any answer to give you, and what sociologists, researchers usually do is to fill out that portions of the their questionnaire according to their own estimates. Okay, simply because no other way around. So these questions we use, for instance, to be able to solve such questions, we use so-called, in methodology courses, unobtrusive techniques, okay, to be able to overcome such difficulties. But there remains always this there. When I ask the question of the income, for instance, I am assuming that there is really a monthly income of that person. When I ask the question of the age of the person, I am really assuming that there is that phenomenon, that tangible phenomenon, age over there, okay? And I am trying to dig it out, okay? Through my language, through my speech, or if you like, through my observation. Now, what's at stake is exactly challenging this attitude. Okay. And in short, what has been said by the usage of these signs, okay, or if you like, in the act of signification, these so-called references are actually produced. Okay. In the very bringing into this delayed presence, okay, and phenomenon of income had been produced, which was not there, okay. This is actually the very crack of the argument, and you can see how this has the potential of exceeding the limits of language as a structuralism wanted to keep it, okay, exceeding the limits of language, and can easily show itself as a very important ontological question. By ontological question, and actually we are now at a point of an ontology, even rejecting that so-called ontological difference proposed by Heidegger between ontic being and ontological being. Okay, you know, ontic and ontological here at the same time, referring to that difference between phenomena and noumena. Okay, my fallenness being as a mortal in Heideggerian language, on the other hand, my forming myself in the form of a Dasein, having a world, okay? And it is this world, and Dasein in this world is called ontological, but Dasein's physical or biological existence is called here ontic, okay? I'm born and I die and I live in the meantime, okay? However, if you follow these simple statements, you can easily see that how they have the potential to overcome the limits of language, to overcome the limits brought about by this ontological difference in Heideggerian thinking, and turns out to be the very sole simple ontological existence without making any reference to ontic being. Okay. What you call ontic is nothing else than to be the produce of the ontological, it becomes. Okay. Actually, such an approach had already been forced through in Deleuze and Guattari's writings too. Okay. They, for instance, when they were referring to the famous problem of becoming other, okay? Within this connection, the problem of becoming other turned out to be not only becoming a conceptual other, but an actual corporeal other at the same time. Even such words, they had already pointed out that naming somebody, for instance, a bachelor or a husband or father, etc., or with some other adjective, okay, creating corporeal transformations, not conceptual, real transformations in the very existence of the persons concerned. Okay? A father is qualitatively different, say, from a bachelor. Okay? The same person can undergo that bachelor period and turn out to be a father, and fathering and being bachelor are not only the continuance of one and the same substance under different disguises, okay? The problem is exactly concerned with this. Now here, within this framework, what comes to the foreground is, of course, apparently the differences, differential elements in structuralism. And Derrida conceives this and shows difference as the very dynamic of this process of the meaning proliferation, not only meaning proliferation, but at the same time, proliferation of the things, so-called presences or referents, okay? What is written as difference, he writes, then will be the playing movement that produces by means of something. And in that regard, I can see that Derrida comes closer to the position of Deleuze and Guattari when they describe, for instance, desire as something productive. What's at stake here? Production, proliferation of meanings, and as well, proliferation of things. And this happens to be in a rather more or less, always more or less, systematic fashion, and this system is tried to be expressed by Derrida in his concept arche-writing. Okay? Arche-writing is that temporal spatial allocation of the things in relation to each other. Okay? Okay, what is written as difference then will be the playing movement that produces by means of something that is not simply an activity. These differences, these effects of difference. This does not mean that the difference that produces differences is somehow before them in a simple and unmodified, indifferent present. Difference is the non-full, non-simple, structured and differentiating origin of differences. Thus the name origin no longer suits it. Okay? Since language, which Saussure says is a classification, has not fallen from the sky, its differences have been produced, are produced effects, but they are effects which do not find their cause in a subject or a substance, in a thing in general, a being that is somewhere present, thereby eluding the play of difference. Okay? So in that moment, he introduces the very interesting conceptual trace, actually, which reminds me the Leibnizian problem of explaining away the question, if the monads do not have windows, and if the monads, okay, let me explain this from the beginning, okay? Descartes suggested the existence of two major substances, mind and body. The problem with the term substances was that substance existences, or in a similar fashion, any change in a given substance cannot be attributed to the existence of another substance. So, in that sense, substances are self-sufficient entities, okay? So, the Cartesian universe was composed of two major substances connected with each other through the mediacy of the God. We have touched upon this question at the beginning of the semester, you know. Spinoza approached this question by claiming that there is only one substance, one and single substance, and what's at stake, it's different realizations, okay, in relation to the attributes and modes organized into an hierarchical order, okay. One and single substance in Spinozian language expressed as God and nature, okay, or the one and sameness of God and nature. Okay, fine, all right. Another alternative to the question was brought about by Leibniz, who talks about the infinite number of substances. According to him, each and every unity, monad, you know, means unity, each and every unity, okay, constitutes a substance. So in accordance with the substances, however, these entities, individual us, for instance, okay, constituting a monad, in itself a universe, so to speak, are not able to relate with each other. Okay? This is expressed by Leibniz by saying that monads do not have windows opening to the outside world. You know, the Kantian schema exactly suits this. If, as an individual incarnation of humanity, each of us has more or less at least similar form of consciousness, it means that we are not capable of coming out of ourselves. Okay? We are forever encapsulated into our own selves. Okay? So we are monads. We only know what's going on inside us. We only know what we see as it appears to us, etc. And in their real form, we can never be aware. And the discussion continues. We arrived at a certain point where Heidegger suggests that actually these two are somehow closely interrelated with each other. But as we have seen, Heideggerian analysis of Dasein is not able to resolve that problem. The world and Dasein still both belong to mine, not yours. Okay, my world, my Dasein. Okay? The same problem persists. Now here we have another attempt, however, which does not start by that individual encapsulated existence, does not take these entities as given presences, so to speak. Therefore, Derrida would try to develop a certain thinking which poses itself against thinking in terms of presence. Okay? We are not talking about presences, but rather we are talking about productions. Okay? Productions of things which are not there. Okay? And production of things in the process or interplay of that originary difference. But the critical point is that the difference itself is not something. For instance, what difference or play of differences produce are things. Okay? Individual me's and you's. Okay? But here, the difference itself is not something. In that sense, you can establish a certain parallelism between the Heideggerian concept of being, which is not something, a certain thing, okay? Sein, which is itself not a Seiende, so to speak, okay? But rather, on the contrary, creating a space upon which all Seiende beings show themselves. Okay? So the Derridian conception of difference, both in the sense of temporization and spacing. Okay? Temporization and spacing, which means that prior to this temporization and spacing, we are not able to talk about the chain of signifiers, okay, the chain of signs, etc. Okay, it's through this temporization and spacing things began to differentiate themselves out and began to organize in relation to each other, acquiring certain contents, or if you like, meanings. Okay, or if you like, their quiddity, whatness, okay? What a certain horse, for instance, this horse is.